To administer the weekly calendar planning assessment, the therapist will set up the materials in a specific order in front of the client. Here, Megan is placing the materials that the client will need to complete the assessment. The correct placement of materials for both the client and the therapist is shown next. The materials for the client include the appointments and errands to be scheduled list, the blank weekly calendar, the sample weekly calendar, 2 different colored highlighters and a pen with 1 to 2 blank pieces of paper, the weekly calendar instruction sheet, and also a stopwatch. For the examiner, they will need a scoring worksheet and the after-task interview and rating scale, which is completed after the assessment. Finally, the recording form is needed to record any mistakes as the client completes the assessment. There are example sheets for the client to use as a reference to understand how to put appointments into the weekly calendar. The therapist will then read the instructions to the client aloud to ensure that they understand the activity completely. Here, the therapist is administering the WCPA to her client. After the therapist reads the instructions aloud to the client, they will present them with an instruction sheet, note the current time, and choose an estimated time that will be 7 minutes after the client begins. The client should keep track of the time while they are filling out the calendar and let the therapist know when 7 minutes have passed. The therapist will indicate to the client what day of the week is free, and the client should not schedule any appointments on that day. Before timing, the therapist will say, "Let's begin," and record this time on the recording form. The therapist will also record the time when the client states that he or she is finished. There are 5 rules to remember as the client completes this assessment. Rule number 1, during the activity, the therapist will ask 3 irrelevant questions at 2, 5, and 10 minutes, and the client should not answer the therapist. These questions include, do you know what the weather is supposed to be tomorrow? Do you have any pets? And what day is your birthday? Make sure that the therapist records these on the recording form if the client answers any of these questions. Rule number 2, the client states the time within 5 minutes of the targeted time, that 7 minutes have passed after they start the assessment. Rule number 3, the client states when he or she is finished. Rule number 4, the client cannot schedule appointments on a free day. And rule number 5, the client cannot cross out appointments on the calendar. The therapist should observe the strategies that the client uses to complete the assessment and ask the client about these in the after-task interview. This after-task interview and rating scale is administered immediately after completion of the assessment. This interview investigates the client's self-perception of their performance.